Please welcome Customer Service Manager and one of the sunniest people you're ever likely to meet, Samy Daly.
Hello. The road to recovery has no physical destination. It cannot be mapped. There is no there, only improvements. Some steps forward, some back. Steps that can only be looked upon kindly in a moment's reflection with renewed perspective. Losing perspective is part of the road too. Recovery means something different for every person. Can everyone see recovery? Not necessarily. Recovery is personal, internal. It is outlook, physical healing, mental and emotional health. It is physiological, psychological. It is not a road with signs, signals, or direction. It is one unlike any other, paved with hope and fear. The road changes shape too. It's never one-dimensional or linear. It isn't simple, but it's not always complicated. Sometimes it's only complicated. There are treasures to be collected along the way if one is open to seeing them as treasures. Insights, new discoveries, tools towards greater strength and awareness. There can be new friends found too, laughter and love that may soothe the wounds of grief and loss. The road to recovery is painstaking, not fast enough, confronting, worthwhile, and wonderful for getting to know oneself. This is not a chosen path, it just becomes the only path. How we travel this road, how we view it and our surroundings, will ultimately create our destination. It's all in the journey. Being at peace with ourselves, finding self-acceptance with what we do have to travel with, that creates room for renewed health. That's the recovery. That's the road that we travel. Hi, my name is Samy, as we could see before and heard from Nick. And I'm here to share with you a small part of my experience living with an acquired brain injury. It's a drop in the ocean really, but I feel really lucky that I can share this with you. At the age of 24, I suffered from a sudden and severe spontaneous brain bleed that left me fighting for my life. There was no accident and no pre-warning, only a great heaviness that came over me and incredible pain in the back of my head and neck. I knew something was very wrong as it was happening. I went to lie down but had no control over my body once my head hit the pillow. I'd been spending the morning with my aunt in her home, drinking coffee sleepily after a late shift at work. It was her who sat beside me as I lay face down on the bed, reassuring me until paramedics arrived. Her calm nature kept me calm. I can still feel her hand on my back as the room drifted away and bemused tears fell down my cheeks. I have no other clear memories of this day other than the dull grey veil that came over me, where time was irrelevant and life was only haze. An induced coma and 2 brain surgeries later, I woke to see my family and face my new reality and the road ahead. On paper, I shouldn't be here. Given the extent of my bleed, I've been told by bewildered specialists at the Alfred Hospital that I could have ended up in a nursing home. Instead, I woke from my coma talking. It was the same me, only in a body I had no or little control over, in a world I couldn't comprehend. There are still no clear answers as to why I had the brain bleed either. We are left only to surmise I was born with a ticking abnormality, with the miracle of right place, right time on my side. Waking to see my family surrounding me, I don't remember feeling scared initially. Those moments came in the quiet hours of night. The hours where my stubborn and determined self decided I wasn't going out like this. In those many hours, I promised myself to become the very best version of myself I could be, the authentic me, limitations and all. I didn't know it then, but I had already begun to make space for the struggles, uncertainty and loss to be the making of me, not the end. At the Alfred Hospital and Caulfield Rehabilitation Hospital, I went on to relearn what we could be forgiven for taking for granted. How to sit up, stand, walk, tie my shoelaces, feed and dress myself, shower, hold the toothbrush. It was a process to then learn how to feel safe alone in the world again, know where my body was in space, how to recognise the strange reflection in the mirror. The left side of my body was severely weakened by the brain bleed. Alien limb syndrome took over to such an extent in hospital that my family and I named my left arm Trunky. Endearing videos of baby elephants discovering their trunks for the first time is worth a Google here for some context, trust me. A sense of humour was found in the most dire of situations. It kept me alive and hopeful. Recovery for me still looked like a broken road many times, a track moving away from myself and all I've ever known. It looked hopeless, futureless. It looked and felt like loneliness. I can't possibly sum up what my last 6 years have looked like. I turned 30 in February this year, and similar to other birthdays, it's a special milestone and celebration not lost on me. Almost 6 years ago now, I was a free, adventurous, vivacious 24-year-old who worked insanely hard, first moving interstate to join an acting school at the age of 17. I enjoyed working a myriad of jobs to fund travel and further studies overseas, all the while battling the kind of crippling anxiety that can accompany a young woman. As I sought to discover more about myself, life and my passions, which I will find here for a moment, self-loathing came easily to me too. That was until I almost lost absolutely everything, affording me the opportunity to learn invaluable lessons and truly lovingly value what my body could do. All of the years, months, days, minutes, seconds of my recovery, the steps towards regaining basic functions could not prepare me for rejoining the world and eventually the workforce. A shaved and scarred head and a weak and medicated body is bound to attract attention. Maybe it's discomfort people experience around you, or pity, or sympathy. Maybe it's nothing. Nervous Centrelink employees wouldn't dare question me or my exhausted mother, or hesitate to be seen to do everything they could around a concerned, protective brother. Paperwork is just organised, boxes are checked, you're in, you've got immediate assistance and support. As time moves on, however, hair grows back, colour returns to the face, and strength in the body is regained. Medical details get lost among the paper trail. Sorry, I'll find my place again. Medical details get lost among the paper trail, and there's a changeover of Centrelink employees and government systems. Your face soon becomes one of hundreds when you can finally walk in for your own appointment. You are nothing special, damaged or unique. As you and your shadow of a life are questioned and scrutinised, you repeat your story to new faces. You cry uncontrollably. You try to look more injured just to get through the trauma of appointments. You go over and over this for years and years. Getting out of bed and battling through your chronic fatigue just to sit in a room that is all too familiar, cold and overwhelming becomes the norm. Fear and relief is felt one day much further down the track when it's suggested you see a disability employment service regarding a return to employment. Me being me, I had already sought out opportunities to get my life back. Volunteering with an I Matter program with Don Care, studying a short course, and working for a friend assisted me in my search for independence, routine and normality. Going to my local gym when I was well enough, journaling, catching a bus to go out for a coffee in my local community, educating myself at home about neuroplasticity, brain health and nutrition are some of the things that kept me sane and thirsty for the possibilities of a full life. I craved to leave my bedroom, to have a day where I didn't have to stop and rest 30 or 40 times a day. When I eventually returned to driving, well after I was seizure and medication free, I also pushed myself to achieve a Certificate 3 in fitness. Going to those classes absolutely terrified me. Most days I would need to sleep in my car just to survive. Most days were hell, but I kept striving for more. I kept hoping I could do everything the way that I used to. Neural fatigue did find me, however, and after pushing myself way too hard too soon, giving things a go and a lack of acceptance of where I was at certainly set me back. I resented myself and my injury so much initially, but I have no regrets. This was all part of the learning process. That road of recovery I spoke about, falling down is the only way to learn how to pick yourself back up and what steps to avoid. Passing me in the street, you probably wouldn't know just how hard I've had to work to be standing here, or the everyday battles I still go through to be me and simply have a day. When I met the first Disability Employment Service, or DES provider, years ago, I wasn't aware that I wasn't wearing a brain injury suit for all to see. I was so full of enthusiasm and terror. I was terribly self-conscious and wanted help and direction so badly. My heart sank and anxiety spiraled when I realised pretty quickly that these support providers had zero understanding or interest in understanding what I was actually going through. This continued and happened again and again when I changed to another DES provider. Over the years, I was met with comments such as, "Oh, but you look fine." "Oh gosh, yes, I've had kids, and I really get so tired." Or "You're lucky you don't have to work so much. I'd love a day off." That one's probably my favourite. It was the dread of seeing these people that started to cause me more stress and panic attacks than anything else in the latter years, and I've been through a lot. It did push me to find work with a friend on my own, however, and it was the 3 hours a week of cafe work I scored that both completely exhausted me and gave me a sense of purpose and balance. For 3 hours a week, every week, I could commit to being my most uncomfortable, face my fears and do it anyway. Serving tables, talking to people, trying to navigate my way around the floor, remembering things, balancing cups of coffee with Trunky, all the while wondering, do I look stupid? What if people can tell there's something wrong with me? What if I make a mistake? What if I knock things over or run into things? I still run into a lot of door frames on my left side though, I will have you know, doing my best. I still had all my medical and rehab appointments to go to in the week as well. My time was spent mostly in my bedroom in my pyjamas, in the car with my mum or at appointments with my mum. I did what I could with what I had. I don't know what I would have done without mum. Happy to have a supportive workplace, I pushed on to increase my hours. Injuries, illness, fatigue, again with the fatigue. So many setbacks, but I persisted in spite of the lack of support my DES provider provided on the sidelines. There was surprise pressure put on me in one appointment where it was announced with no plan that I was to suddenly reach a target of 15 hours of work a week to qualify for continued financial support as a job seeker. There was nothing about my acquired brain injury that Centrelink had, it was just that I was a job seeker. When having a shower was a success in my everyday, and 3 hours of work was an enormous achievement, this obscure benchmark intimidated and crushed me initially. To escape the extra pressure and ridiculously long appointments with Centrelink and my provider, where we actually discussed their personal problems, I at least had wonderful support from my doctors who assigned me a medical certificate just to have a break. Not at all from the pursuit of more work, but from the very people employed to assist me. I was free to search and rest according to where my body was at. In this time, I found my own new job to go to. My cafe work had taught me how to be open with people again, how to talk and how to forgive myself for human mistakes. I found the energy to enjoy myself and go out a little more, and a chance social situation ended with me asking for a job at a localish pub. This became the very place I was to first work up to my 15-hour work week and actually feel validated. I was a real person again, doing what it is real people do. As time went on, having a reliable job to go to completely changed my life for the better. It wasn't easy. Nothing about life was ever easy. But it was a challenge worth pursuing. The opportunities that opened up, the strength and stamina and routine I was able to build, it was amazing. I was so happy, and while faking it until I made it, I learned to trust myself again. Most importantly, I learned what I was truly capable of. I learned to value myself, who to trust with my employment, and who I could truly rely on. It allowed me to make new friends and have a social life again too. The complications I experienced soon came every fortnight when I saw my newest DES provider, who again, instead of hearing me when I was exhausted or down and out, lent on me for advice and help. I should probably take that as a compliment, right? They talked about themselves, or they talked about where they thought I was better suited, which was usually a business they were connected to kilometres away, which would have me sitting behind a desk by myself moving paper. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this, except that I was happy with my job, and that alternative wasn't very Samy. I became a set of ears at every appointment, and towards the end of my sessions, in my exhausted state, would be asked to sign documents and agree to things that I couldn't comprehend. The lack of care taken on their side meant reports weren't filed correctly either, leaving me to spend hours on the phone having to explain myself again and again to Centrelink. It doesn't sound like all that much extra work on my part, but it was. Every time I took what felt like a backward step. It was triggering, felt demeaning, and would undermine my progress. I was often overwhelmed. I was doing everything right by the system, as well as pushing myself into consistent work only 4 years post-trauma. What else could I do? Seeing my cycle of distress in a system that was aimed to support me, my beautiful partner Joel, who I actually met at that bartending job I got, had started to come with me to my compulsory DES appointments for extra support. In his presence, not quite surprisingly, I was spoken to quite differently. Experiencing the appointment firsthand, however, Joel made a phone call to Nick Rushworth from Brain Injury Australia. And it was from this conversation that we heard about and were referred to Max Employment for help. I think I may have cried with happiness and relief after my first appointment with John at Max Glen Waverley. Finally, no bullshit. Instead, human beings who understand what it was like to be human and who understood adversity, paving the way for me to lead and guide them. People who truly saw and heard me and could see my efforts, my drive, my determination, my sadness and my triumphs. They wanted to learn from me, not push me too hard, and in just one welcoming conversation I could see it. I soon started regular appointments with John and Eric, sessions I still look forward to. They gave of themselves and shared the road with me, celebrated and got to know me. I started to really believe in myself again, find confidence and accept myself. I soon began to find more work, increasing my hours safely and in a way that was manageable. We created more goals, surpassing the limits I had previously set myself. This is the power of genuine empathy and support. Whatever you think you might know about a person, any person, just wait. Wait to see and get to know them. Wait to get to know the person behind the mask, because we've all got one, or the person behind the injury. I've had very different jobs since my cafe days, but consistent employment. Each role has made me stronger, introduced me to new people, and helped me to feel in control of my life again. I still have setbacks, I still doubt and struggle, but I do believe that simply by having people in my life who genuinely believe in me has allowed me to cultivate a deep belief in myself and my potential. A kind words, a laugh, a pair of new work shoes, help with a resume or a new job application, realistic goal setting, or a phone call to ask how you are. These are the game-changing things. The seemingly little things, these are actually everything to someone like me. I am beyond grateful to have the ability to speak and to speak up for myself now. I don't feel so alone or trapped or intimidated. I think of the future and I finally feel excited. I've had the courage to try and fail and try again. I've had the confidence to be proactive in pursuing my own job interests, and since being with Max Employment have worked consistently close to 20 hours a week. Max Employment have helped me that summer last year I reached 28 hours of work a week before a setback slowed my progress, but with their support I am on track again to reach a 25-hour work week in a brand new position. Working in hospitality and customer service allows me to connect with the world I was once so terrified of. I've found myself again, or at least I've found my new normal. In it, I have a groove I could once really only dream of from my bedroom. I am living proof of the possibilities a little bit of help and direction can bring. I feel I have a duty to now share my experiences and help others find their way any way that I can. To anyone who can relate to my story and might be thinking about braving the workforce or volunteering or joining a social group or encouraging someone that they love, just do it. I have no regrets, only more life tools and coping skills, only richer life experiences, deeper relationships, and a love of myself and my life I may not have ever found if this had not happened to me. I am not what happened to me, though. I am what I choose to become on this road. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Samy. David Best has been Senior Policy Officer at Disability Employment Australia since November 2016. Prior to this, he worked in a number of Commonwealth Government departments as an employment case manager, a contract manager in the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations, and more recently as a policy advisor in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet's Indigenous Affairs Group. Please welcome David.
Now, I might just move on a couple of the screens here because of the last speaker's talk about DES. And I was very interested to hear if anyone else has had any of those experiences with DES who may have been referred to a DES and it hasn't been a positive experience. Anyone in the room? Yeah, a couple, a few. And was it?
I'm working with people with DES.
DES, yep.
I've experienced multiple DES over multiple years.
Okay. I won't sugarcoat it in terms of some of the criticisms about DES, but the program has recently had a reboot to try and improve some factors around DES. And if I can just drive this thing.
You've got a clicker there too, David.
Is it? Oh, yeah. That one?
Yep.
Okay. So the DES program is primarily there to support people with a disability to look for work. And previously it was a market share model where you were referred to a service in your area, and it was quite difficult to transfer if you weren't happy with your service. You used to have to go through a transfer by agreement process. So with the reboot in July 2018, they got rid of the market-driven. It's moved to a market-driven model with no market shares, which means you are able to change providers, no questions asked, up to 5 times during your service period. So if you don't like your service, all you have to do is ring up the customer service line and they will transfer you to the service that you wish. The only thing that you need to do is do a bit of research in terms of the provider that you would like to go to. So obviously, you know, Max is partnering with Nick here, and they're doing some work in terms of ABI clients. And that story that we've just heard really shows that there's some fantastic things happening there. So I say, if you're not happy with your service, ring up the customer service line and transfer to a new service. You're not stuck with the one service for 2 years. And they should be helping you look for work, and they should be doing an assessment to see, you know, what you're capable of and any of the other factors that impact on your ability to do work and how many hours a week you can do, whether that be 10, 15 or 20 or full time. There's also the concept of the porous boundaries, which means if you lived in, say, I come from Brisbane, and if you lived in North Brisbane, but there was a service you wanted to go to in the south side of Brisbane, you would be able to go to that service as well. So you're not stuck again to a geographical region. And they also introduced the concept of the 52-week employment outcome. So essentially under DES, it's a service model and outcome model driven program. So providers get service fees to take you on, but most funding is in the outcome fee component. So the more outcomes they get for you, the more money they'll get. And participants are assigned an outcome funding level from 1 to 5, where 1 is, but it's based on what previous data showing the ease to getting someone a job. So 1 is the lowest, whereas 5 is the highest. So just to give you an example, I pulled data on ABI clients in the DES program, and over 75% are in the level 3 to 5 funding levels, and those numbers in brackets indicate the outcome fees that provider would get if they got you a 26-week outcome. So if they're able to get you 26 weeks of work based on your benchmark, then they would get, for a level 5, $15,000. Again, the concept of benchmarks is, again, it's based primarily on the Centrelink medical model, which assigns you, they assess you to say, I think you can do 15 hours per week with interventions, or 23 hours per week, or 8 hours per week. But we at DEA do have some problems with that in terms of capability, and capabilities can change over time depending on circumstances. Also with the DES reboot, there's been a big increase in the numbers going into the program since July 18. So there was 193,000 in DES back in June 18, and that's risen to 259,000 in September of this year. So more people are going to the program, providers are looking for clients, so there's been a big increase. And I did pull out the ABI data in terms of participants in DES. Now, if you can see that data up there, it has increased in raw numbers. So it was about 2,150 in September 2018. It's now up to 2,780 at September 2019, but it still makes up 1.1% of the total caseload of DES. So I think there's still some room. I'm sure that there's many more people with ABI who are looking for work who aren't accessing a DES who might be able to get support from a DES. And also, if you compare them to the other disability types, the Department of Social Services does keep data around different categories of main disability. So you can see physical and psychiatric are the two big ones. And then, intellectual disability, autism, neurological, specific learning, hearing, acquired brain injury is on 1.1%. But what that data doesn't give you is like some people who might have a physical injury and an ABI as well, or an autism who's also got an intellectual disability. It only collects the main disability type. Now, turning to outcomes. Now, these are, again, we're talking DES program. This is based from the old contract up to December 17. And when those outcome rates are based on job placement rates, the number of people who get a job, 26-week outcomes, the number of those people who get a job that goes to 26 weeks of employment. And then the 52-week indicator was those who went on to 52 weeks of work. They would check with Centrelink to see if they were still declaring or gone back onto full allowance. ABI is sort of in the middle there. It's not at the highest, it's not at the lowest. Physical disability tends to be the lowest, one of the lowest outcome performing rates. But I still think that could improve with better skills base for DES providers overall. Now, this one doesn't look too good. This is raw numbers based on just outcome counts from the new DES for ABI clients. So this is across Australia. So there's been 58 people who've gotten a 4-week outcome, 39 people who've got a 13-week outcome, 33 who've got 26 weeks, and 23 who've gone to 52 weeks of employment through DES. Yep. It's not a percentage, that's raw numbers. So that's 58 people who've gotten a 4-week outcome. It doesn't look very good, like on that. If you look at those figures, it's not very good for a program that's 18 months old. If you converted that to a percentage rate, it wouldn't look good at all. So it's still early days, but there is a bit of a concern. When I pulled that out, there was a bit of a concern to me compared to some of the overall outcome rates, compared to all of the disability types. Yeah. It's probably, you can monitor these things over 12, 24, 36 months, but ultimately you would like to see a bigger, a spike there that shows that it's working for ABI clients and getting some jobs. Yeah. So, now I did want to do a bit of a comparison to the NDIS and what's happening there, bearing in mind they're two different programs with two different structures, two different things that they're supporting people for. And now, of course, the NDIS has been is very focused on getting people's plans into place. So the official figures are from June 19 that show 286,000. I understand it's now about 300,000 who have approved plans, and about 170,000 of those are of working age. Now, this shows a bit of a difference in terms of, this is the number of approved plans by disability type, and ABI is at 4%. So if you compare that to DES, which is about 1%, there's more people getting NDIS plans as a proportion in the NDIS. And again, the NDIS is the biggest type, so the intellectual disability and autism. Probably one more positive side, there's over 10,000 people with ABI approved plans in the NDIS, but they're getting 6.5% of the total expenditure. So as a client group, they're getting more. They're not getting 4% of numbers, 4% of expenditure. They're getting more than the 4% expenditure. The very vast majority of participants with approved plans are over 25 years of age. There's very few in the 0 to 7, 7 to 14, and even that 15 to 24 age group. Now, the NDIS has also had their employment task force, and I'll be pleased to tell you that they, hopefully, I don't know if anyone from the NDIS is here today, that they're going to launch that strategy next week. I understand there's an official launch next Thursday. But some of the things that they've been trying to do in their terms of reference was to create seamless pathways for NDIS participants into employment and to improve employment supports in participant plans, and also some work about clarifying the work of DES versus the work of employment supports in the NDIS. So there are some vagaries there. There's also some vagaries around the school leaver employment supports part of NDIS and the eligible school leaver part of DES, and how they overlap and whether there should be a correlation between the two. So that's for the kids who are still in school, who are obviously going to leave school, and are they going to look for employment, or what's their next transition point in life and how they're supported with that. We do have a lot of our DES providers are also registered with as SLES providers or NDIS providers. So some it seems to work well for, but some it's sort of the twain don't meet. There's a lot of confusion in terms of the two of them. I will say the Employment Task Force has done a lot of consultation. They've done an ABI specific consultation. I think the only thing is with the consultations, I've been a part of 3 of them, I think. You don't really get feedback of what they've found or what they're thinking or how it moves into some recommendations or something tangible on the ground. But we're very interested at DEA to see the interaction between the two, because our main aim is, it's employment. We're looking at increasing employment rates for people with disability. And as Bruce's data showed, there's still that huge gap in terms of employment rates for people with disability. It's vastly less than people without a disability, and people who've just dropped out. People who've given up. They've given up looking for work. Now, I didn't include a case study, so this was from a DES provider. I won't give the name of the DES provider. The client had a traumatic head injury via a car accident. Sarah was working as a call centre operator in an insurance agency. She was unable to work for about 15 months following the accident. When she had sufficient recovery, she was very keen to get back to work, but she had some difficulties in working out what she could do and how many hours of work she could do, and also some self-confidence issues in terms of, can I work again? Will an employer understand my condition? She also had ongoing impacts from her injury of some cognitive impairment. She also suffered fatigue and also headaches. She also had a leg injury from the car accident, which meant she couldn't stand for long periods. But she wanted to work. So she was referred to DES via the ESAP process via Centrelink. So the ESAP process is essentially, if you're on a benefit and particularly New Start allowance and disability support pension, you can get assessed to see what type of work you can do, and then that's where they give you the benchmark hours, and then you're referred to a DES. If the benchmark hours are too low, 0 to 7, you might not get referred to a DES because you're technically not eligible, but in some cases you can volunteer for a DES. She decided to select a service close to home, which most people do, or if they've had some previous family or friend interaction with a service, they usually go to those people, or if it's near a train station or a bus, they'll go to that service. But it didn't work out. Her consultant didn't have any idea about ABI and the types of jobs that would suit Sarah. So eventually she was under the old system, so she had to do some research and then go around the process of finding a new service, and also she did know there was a consultant in one service who had worked with people with ABI, so she was eventually able to transfer to that service. So once with the new service, the consultant did a bit of more thorough assessment of the impacts of her injury and also what she thought she could do. And the consultant had a much more positive attitude in terms of that confidence building, that yes, you can work. We've just got to find you the right work. And we have to talk to our employers that we refer you to about your condition. We've got to be upfront with that. She was referred to a part-time position, doing some data input and some limited phone calls. She did used to work in primarily a call centre, but she couldn't do full, ongoing call centre work. But it was still a job where she had to answer the phone calls. They also utilised ongoing support via DES to support on a weekly basis. So ongoing supports funds that DES have to actually support a person in the workplace. Doesn't cost the employer anything. The consultant can come in, once a week for an hour, and then they can support, how's the job going? Is there anything that we can do to support you? Talk to the employer. A bit different from workplace modifications that can be paid for by the Employment Assistance Fund through Job Access. But ongoing support is really there to help the person to stay in the job over the longer period. One important factor that they negotiated early on was that the employer had to factor in rest periods for Sarah. So there were regular periods of rest where she, not like 30-minute rest periods, but just enough for her to regroup, rest, and then get back into work. So she's been in that job for 2 years now, so it's worked out well for that one. But it mainly worked because she was able to find a new provider that suited her needs. So what does all of this mean? I still believe outcome rates in DES are lower for ABI than other disability types. I think that there needs to be more done in terms of provider education around knowledge of ABI and the implications for employment. There's a lot of generalist services in DES. So they're seeing anyone who comes through the door, but they're probably seeing 80% of people coming in with a physical injury or a psych injury or a school leaver, and they're not necessarily given much training in terms of disability type and the types of factors that impact on that person's condition and what you need to factor in when you're negotiating with employers around work. DEA is constantly working with DES providers to improve accessibility and also to improve their knowledge base. But I still think there's more to be done. It's like you're scratching the edge, but there's a lot more that I think everyone could do, and including ourselves as a peak body. Now, the NDIS has the 10,000 people with approved plans with ABI as a principal primary disability. It'd be interesting to see if those 10,000, how many are working and how many might need support from their plans for their work, or how many might need support to look for work, or those who are getting other types of support through the NDIS that's not employment related. And we'll be very excited to see the results of the NDIS Employment Task Force. So if that drops next Thursday, then we'll be we'll be doing a circular from our network to give the basic overview of what they're talking about. But it's been 9 months, so we're very interested in that work, and we've been going to a lot of their workshops. Now, just one thing I want to close on. This is a concept that ourselves and the other peak employment bodies have been working on. It's about the creation of a national disability employment plan, and the aim of it is to really unite disparate policies, practices and programs across departments with the objective of closing the gap between workforce participation rates for people with disability and people without disability. So it's like a closing the gap, but we're not calling it closing the gap. And we've been lobbying the government and talking to government and DSS and the NDIS about this strategy. And it will need to be, if we can get it up, it will have to be interlinked with the National Disability Strategy 2020 and 2030. So that's a work in progress, but that's probably an overarching strategy for all people with disability. But we think that we've been talking about this for over 30 years. That gap, that 53% to 83%, has not changed essentially over the last 30 years since the Disability Services Act came into place. So that's the points that I wanted to cover. It's a resource out there. DESs are a resource out there. They are there to help people with disability. And I think with the new arrangements about choice and control model, if you don't like your service, find a new service, do some research and get referred to a new service. So.
Thank you, David. Libby Callaway is a registered occupational therapist and senior lecturer at Monash University. Libby consulted to the National Disability Insurance Agency.
Let's just move on.
Oh, come on.
Let's get
You're going
started.
to deprive me of a role, okay.
You can introduce my colleague.
And she has with her Dr. M. Bould. You happy with that?
That's
Okay,
great.
brilliant. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We are the last presentation of the day. Thank you for staying. What a fantastic session it's been. We'd just like to firstly acknowledge the owners of the traditional land on which we meet today and pay respect to their elders, past, present and emerging. We also would like to acknowledge our fabulous colleagues here, Scott Thomas, Sarah Johnstone, and also our other colleague Libby Witts, who's worked with us on this project, developing a new pathway of employment for people with acquired brain injury called Employment CoLab. So that's working, so that's good. We've heard a bit about data today, and I guess I've been reflecting, particularly being very excited to hear John Corrigan speak, and reflecting on a model that he wrote back in 1994 with his colleague Barry Willer called Whatever It Takes, which is a model that I still get every student that comes into placement with us to read. And one of the key principles of the Whatever It Takes model is that life is a place and chain venture, and we should make sure that resources last the life of a person living with acquired brain injury, because the outcomes that exist for them span over a lifetime also. So we do know that employment outcomes have been traditionally low for people with ABI, but we have a lot of research, and from our group we've developed a model of community practice to try and build participation. And we heard from Matt this morning that people can make gains in role participation many years post-brain injury. So with that in mind, and with a traditional focus on supported employment, volunteering, or transition to open employment but with very little support that we've also heard about today, we really wanted to look at the existing pathways to mainstream employment for people with ABI in Australia, and we wanted to do that with people with lived experience of acquired brain injury who were the experts on this topic. And we then wanted to consider, do we use those pathways, or do we need to look at new ways of approaching employment to ensure people with brain injury have the same opportunities as all other Australians? So what we did was we developed a collaboration between the Occupational Therapy Department and Monash, the Transport Accident Commission here in Victoria, and we applied for some funding through Jobs Victoria, which is a state government funded body focused on employment, and we secured a one-year Jobs Victoria Innovation Fund grant to focus particularly on building mainstream employment opportunities with people with acquired brain injury. There were two key areas we wanted to focus on through this year of work. The first was to respond to the needs and choices of people with brain injury that we heard so much from, that I want to find a job, I want to keep a job. But also to work with employers, to look for those employers that were saying we want a diverse workforce and we want to know what best practice looks like in diversity in workplace. And again, using the expertise of our colleagues employed at Monash, Scott and Libby, to really understand from them, how can we make sure employers work well with people that have lived experience of acquired brain injury? So there's been 3 phases of this project. We're just finishing phase 2, and we really wanted to present that to you today because we think that there's some real opportunity here for people with brain injury to get much better outcomes in mainstream employment, better mainstream wages, so that they can have the same choices as everyone else around housing, around what they do on the weekend, that we just haven't seen traditionally for people because they're on such low incomes. So the first thing we did, which Em and Scott and Libby worked very closely on, was looked at the 31 pathways to employment that exist, particularly for people that might have lived experience of disability, and then choose some of those pathways to work through intensively with Libby and Scott, who have had a lot of employment pathway experience themselves since acquired brain injury. And we documented those in quite a lot of detail. What were the positives of those pathways? What were some of the challenges from the perspective of people with ABI? We then looked at, well, can we use these pathways? And I guess we got to the point where we said, actually, we need to look at some new features of approaches to mainstream employment. And we developed a new pathway called Employment Collab, which Em's going to go through. And our final phase is really to look at how we're going to make sure this pathway can exist beyond the 12 months of Monash University's input. We will finish, and we want to make sure that we can hand this over and it continues within the NDIS and for TAC clients as it has in the pilot period. So I guess just again to acknowledge the expertise we've had from Libby and Scott, and as I mentioned, Libby can't be here today, Scott is. Please do feel free to chat to him at the end and ask him his perspectives. But what we did was, through looking at those pathways, develop a whole lot of different fact sheets, which once they're approved by Jobs Victoria, we aim to put those onto a free website we've developed for that's focused particularly on training people that may be working with someone with acquired brain injury. Again, the resources on there were developed by our team, Sue Sloan, and a number of people with lived experience of brain injury contributed to those resources, as well as Jan Mackey, a speech pathologist. So we hope that those fact sheets will be approved by state government to then go on to that free resource for others to use. But what I'll do now is hand over to Em, who'll explain where we got to with the pathway to employment.
So Employment Collab represents a collaboration between the employee, the employer and paid informal supporters. We don't have time to go into great detail, but to give you a brief overview, we start by identifying the industry or employer need, and then we engage with the employer and document their business and human resource need. And then once a role has been established, we're developing pictorial job descriptions detailing the exact tasks of that role. And then identifying NDIS participants and TAC clients that have a work goal matched to that employment need. And our colleagues talked to us about the difficulty they found with interviews. So there's no interview. Instead, candidates are invited to do an on-site assessment at the workplace where suitability for the role is assessed through a supportive and practical process. And the successful candidate, as well as the employer and co-workers, are provided with on-the-job support. What that looks like varies depending on the identified support needs. And finally, the employee progress is reviewed regularly through feedback sessions facilitated by the Collab consultant. And this is ongoing for the lifetime of the job. And I guess this is trying to address is what David just alluded to with those graphs, that it's easier to place somebody in a job, but actually over time that actually decreases. We also just wanted to mention that more recently the project team sought expressions of interest from vocational providers to work with us to trial the pathway. And since June this year, we've been working collaboratively with an employee of IPAR who has been assigned to the role of Collab consultant. And this is something that we thought was important for the sustainability of Employment Collab beyond the lifetime of the project activities. The Employment Collab model is now being tested with a range of employees and employers. We started by trialling the pathway in the physio department at Monash Uni. The lab assistant role is being shared across 2 people, an NDIS participant working 1 hour, 1 day a week, and a TAC client who started working 2 hours, 1 day a week, and has since increased to working 2 hours, 2 days a week. And their role is to support the resource officers, so tasks include setting up prac rooms for students, cleaning equipment and tidying up the rooms after they've been used. The TAC created a video with this client which we'd like to share with you now. Hopefully.
The project is building and testing mainstream pathways to open employment for people with acquired brain injury that's now been officially renamed as the Employment Collab pathway.
The project was specifically around people with acquired brain injury. And there doesn't seem to be a pathway that already exists, so we've sort of looked at pathways that are out there and developed our own.
Historically, a lot of our clients with acquired brain injury have faced a lot of challenges getting into open employment.
One of the things the consultants was having a job description doesn't really help them, so that was one of the things that we really took on board and developed a sort of a more customised list of tasks with pictures, so they understood what the role would be.
So Scott's just come aboard, so I think today was his 3rd shift, so it's a new experience for both of us, but so far very positive. It came via an email from my head department, would you be willing, interested in being part of the process? And I said, yeah, sounds great. Part of the recruitment process was Scott coming out with Ellen for both parties to have a come together and see if it was going to work. I think he went away on that day saying yes, he wanted to go back, and I said it would be great to have you.
I just came in for an induction. It was good, like a working interview rather than a read main thing. I think you need that when you've been out of work for a while. You need someone to push you a bit because you get comfortable. It's hard to get back to work. Yeah, like we carry mannequins and all that. We've been doing a bit of cleaning this week because the students are not here doing exams. Set up the machines and that for the classrooms, like the ultrasound and all that. I'm trained as a professional writing, so it's really practical, as is teaching. This is a practical job, so it helps me a bit, and it's outside my comfort zone.
I was quite excited about the prospect, especially after the first interview and meeting and seeing what Bill was about. I think he recognised it was going to be a good fit. I think Scott's support has been probably around more prompts and guidance. He's actually been quite good and he's quite resourceful. I wanted to make sure he still felt empowered, so I didn't want to jump in and offer too much support. I wanted him to really take that lead. So my role from here, I will be continuing to support Scott greater, so we're going to increase days as well as build his independence to drive here independently, and it's just helping him work out the balance. It's certainly been a good process, and it certainly has been quite smooth, but the correspondence and the communication is there from the start.
He's positive, he's hardworking, got a great sense of humour as well, and he's already fed back to me how he's feeling personal and useful again by coming in and working.
Yeah, I was excited, yeah, it was good. Good to be doing something.
So another participant is employed as a crossing supervisor. They work mornings and afternoons for 1 hour, 4 days a week, and their role is to ensure that pedestrians can cross safely. Another participant is a production assistant in a bakery. He's working as part of a small team and is responsible for making pastries as well as packing customer orders into boxes. And part of the bridging plan included fatigue management. So there's been a gradual increase in hours. He started with a 3-hour shift and he's now working 2 days a week with a view to increasing to 15 hours. And finally, a participant has gained employment in a customer service representative email correspondence role for a government organisation, and their role is to respond to customer inquiries, follow through to resolution and log all customer incidents accurately in the required systems. And once again, fatigue management is part of their bridging plan with a gradual increase in working hours and days with a view to increasing to 15 hours. I'll now hand back over to Libby, who's going to discuss the 3-step evaluation.
We really wanted to touch on evaluation because I do think it's a dilemma when we talk about the need for large-scale data nationally and internationally, and listening to Bruce today, I'm again challenged in thinking, how do we capture the change that is so important to an individual when it might be moving from 2 hours a week of work to 4 hours a week of work? And measures just aren't going to pick that up in a large database. So it's a real challenge that we've been working through and talking to Scott and Libby about, is how you actually capture the impact that these changes in employment have for someone when they may not have been employed for over 20 years since an acquired brain injury. So the range of years post-injury for the group that we're working with are 5 years to 20 years post-injury, and for some this is their first job at 20 years post-injury. So we're talking about a group that's had a very significant injury and perhaps hasn't had work experience for decades post-injury. So our first approach to evaluation, when we were trying to work out how we're going to measure whether this is actually working or not, was to talk to our colleagues about the design of the pathway and get them to work through it step by step and give us very detailed feedback. We then brought together a group of health professionals that had experience in acquired brain injury and did the same with them. And we really did further design I think we're at iteration 12 of Employment CoLab with that input from those expert groups. We then started to look at published measures, and I just wanted to touch on these for you because ultimately we don't think these are sensitive enough for the type of work we're doing, and this is a dilemma I think we have for big data. So we looked at firstly work readiness and work capacity, and we looked closely at the work readiness profile, which Sarah introduced us to, and we think it's a great tool. We looked also at the worker role interview and thinking about what that might give us as far as evidence of change experienced by a person or a group of people. We then looked at support needs and thinking about, can you pick up changes in support need? And if you look at something like the Mayo Portland or even the Community Integration Questionnaire, it goes from no work to 5 hours a week work to 30 hours a week work. And you heard from those examples of the people that we've been working through CoLab of the small increments that are necessary. And I thought Samy just illustrated that so beautifully, that for her it's been about this very strategic process to actually increase her hours and then perhaps decrease your hours, you're explaining, Samy, too.